gunshot echoed across Riverside Park before anyone could scream. Except it wasn't a gunshot. It was the crack of a command so violent, so final, that it tore through the morning air like a bullet. "Titan, attack! Take her down!" Margaret Flynn didn't flinch. At 73 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and a faded army jacket draped over her narrow shoulders, she had heard worse, much worse. She had heard mortars whistle through Kandahar nights. She had heard the screams of wounded soldiers whose faces she still saw when she closed her eyes. She had heard the silence after an IED detonated, the kind of silence that swallowed sound itself. But this was different. The massive German shepherd at her feet didn't move. His ears flicked back, his dark eyes locked on the 3 police officers advancing across the dew-wet grass, but he didn't attack. Instead, he shifted his muscular body closer to Margaret, his shoulder pressing against her leg. A low, grumbling growl vibrated from his chest, but it wasn't directed at her. It was a warning, a promise. "Ma'am, step away from the animal, now!" The lead officer, a thick-necked man with a badge that read Sergeant Calloway, had his hand hovering near his holster. His face was red, veins bulging at his temples. Behind him, 2 younger officers flanked him like nervous shadows, their hands also twitching toward their weapons. Margaret's hand dropped instinctively to the dog's head, her fingers curling into the thick fur at his neck. "I don't understand. He's not dangerous. He's been with me for 3 days. He's gentle. That animal is a highly trained police canine unit reported missing 4 days ago," Calloway barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "His name is Titan, and he is considered dangerous and unstable. He attacked an officer during a raid. He's unpredictable, violent, and you need to step back before someone gets hurt." The dog, Titan they called him, pressed harder against Margaret's leg. She felt the tremor running through his body, a vibration that wasn't fear. It was recognition. It was memory. It was something she understood in her bones, because she felt it too. "He hasn't hurt anyone," Margaret said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flood her system. "He showed up at my apartment 3 mornings ago. He was limping, hungry. I fed him. I cleaned a cut on his paw. He's been sleeping at the foot of my bed ever since. He's not dangerous." "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again." "Then don't." Margaret's voice hardened, and for a moment the officers saw something flicker across her face. Something that didn't belong to a frail old woman. Something forged in sand and blood and impossible choices. "If he were dangerous, Sergeant, I'd already be dead. Look at him. Really look." Calloway hesitated. The dog was enormous, easily 90 pounds of pure muscle, his black and tan coat sleek and powerful. But his posture wasn't aggressive. His body was angled protectively, his eyes watchful but not wild. His growl had subsided into a low, steady rumble, a sound more like a motor than a threat. "I don't care what he looks like," Calloway snapped. "I have my orders. Titan, attack. Take her down." The park seemed to hold its breath. A mother with a stroller froze on the path. A jogger stopped mid-stride. An elderly man feeding pigeons turned, his hands suspended in mid-air, seeds spilling onto the ground. The dog's body coiled, muscles bunching beneath his coat, his lips pulled back, revealing white fangs that gleamed in the morning sunlight. For a heartbeat, Margaret thought she had been wrong. For a heartbeat, she thought she was about to die. And then the dog pivoted, not toward her, but toward Calloway. He planted himself between Margaret and the officers, his stance wide and unshakable. His growl deepened, no longer a warning, but a declaration. His eyes locked on Calloway with an intensity that was almost human, almost accusing. "What the hell?" one of the younger officers whispered. Calloway's face went from red to purple. "Titan, stand down! Heel! Heel!" The dog didn't move. Margaret's heart was pounding now, a drumbeat in her ears that drowned out the distant traffic, the rustle of leaves, the murmur of gathering onlookers. Her mind raced, fragments of memory flashing like a broken film reel. Sand, heat, the weight of a rifle, the smell of diesel and sweat and fear, and a voice she hadn't heard in decades, but that still lived somewhere deep in her chest. "His name isn't Titan," she said softly. Calloway spun toward her. "What?" "His name isn't Titan." Margaret knelt slowly, her knees protesting, her hand still resting on the dog's head. She looked into his eyes, those deep, dark eyes that held more than animal instinct. They held grief, they held loyalty, they held a question she suddenly understood. "You know me, don't you, boy?" The dog's ears pricked forward. His tail, which had been rigid and low, gave a single, hesitant wag. Margaret's throat tightened. Her hand moved without conscious thought, forming a shape in the air. A flat palm, fingers together, swept sharply to the left. A signal she hadn't used in 30 years. A signal from a life she thought she'd left behind. The dog dropped instantly into a perfect sit, his body aligned, his focus absolute. The crowd gasped. Calloway's mouth fell open. "How did you—" Margaret ignored him. Her hands moved again, a series of quick, precise gestures. The dog responded flawlessly. Down, stay, watch, alert. Each command executed with the kind of precision that only came from years of training, from a bond forged in fire and desperation and absolute trust. "You were a handler," one of the younger officers breathed. Margaret's eyes didn't leave the dog. "Sergeant Margaret Flynn, U.S. Army, 37th Infantry Division, K-9 Unit, served 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, honorably discharged in 1995. Her voice cracked. "I thought they were all gone. I thought—" The dog whined, a high, desperate sound that cut through her words. He pressed his head against her chest, and Margaret felt the shudder run through him, the same shudder she felt every time she woke at 3 a.m. from dreams that smelled like smoke and tasted like dust. "This is impossible," Calloway said, but his voice had lost its edge. He looked at the dog, then at Margaret, then back at the dog. "Titan was never military. He's been with the department for 5 years. Then where did he learn those signals?" Margaret interrupted, her hand still buried in the dog's fur. "Those aren't standard police commands. Those are classified military canine protocols from the early 90s. I helped develop them." She looked up at Calloway, and her eyes were hard. "If you've had him for 5 years, where was he before that? Where did he come from?" Calloway's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The dog turned his head sharply, his attention snapping to Calloway with laser focus. His growl returned, deeper this time, resonating in his chest like thunder. His eyes didn't blink, his body tensed, not in preparation to attack, but in accusation. "Why is he looking at you like that?" the younger officer asked, taking a step back. "I don't—" Calloway started, but the dog barked once, sharp, final. Margaret's mind was working now, pieces clicking together with the precision of a rifle bolt sliding home. "You said he attacked an officer during a raid? What kind of raid?" "That's classified." "Narcotics? Weapons? What was it?" Margaret stood, her full height barely reaching Calloway's shoulder, but her presence suddenly filled the space between them. "What happened during that raid that made you declare a highly trained canine unit dangerous and unstable?" Calloway's hand moved to his belt, fingers drumming against the leather, a nervous tick. The dog's eyes tracked the movement, his growl intensifying. "He bit Officer Ramirez," Calloway said flatly, "during a narcotics raid 3 weeks ago, unprovoked. Ramirez was securing evidence, and Titan just snapped, went for his arm. We had to pull him off. After that, he became erratic, wouldn't respond to commands, kept circling back to the evidence locker, barking, scratching at the door. We couldn't trust him in the field anymore." evidence locker, Margaret repeated slowly. She looked down at the dog. No, not Titan. She wouldn't call him that. In her mind, a name was forming, a name that fit the soul looking back at her through those ancient eyes. What was in the evidence locker? Confiscated narcotics from the raid, standard procedure. To show me his teeth, she said suddenly. What? His teeth, show me. She knelt again, her hands moving to the dog's muzzle. He allowed it, his trust in her absolute. She gently pulled back his lips, exposing his gums, his fangs. No scarring, no damage, no signs of aggressive biting. She looked up at Calloway. I was a handler for 12 years, Sergeant. I know what an attack bite looks like. I know what a warning bite looks like. And I know what a detection alert looks like. She stood again, her voice rising. He didn't attack Officer Ramirez. He alerted on Ramirez. He smelled something on Ramirez that shouldn't have been there. And when Ramirez tried to interfere, the dog did his job. He protected the evidence. The silence that followed was deafening. Calloway's face had gone pale. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Margaret's voice was ice. How much narcotics went missing from that evidence locker, Sergeant? How much disappeared after you pulled this dog off the case and labeled him unstable? That's defamation. That's the truth, and he knows it. Margaret pointed at the dog, who was now staring at Calloway with an intensity that made the officer take an involuntary step back. Sarge, the younger officer spoke up. The missing inventory from that raid, the report said it was a clerical error. Shut up, Martinez, Calloway snapped. How much? How much cocaine? How much heroin? How much was worth sacrificing a dog's life to cover up? Calloway's hand moved to his holster. The dog exploded into motion, not attacking, but positioning himself fully in front of Margaret, his body a living wall, his bark sharp and commanding. The crowd, which had grown to nearly 40 people, collectively gasped and pulled out phones. Don't, one of the younger officers said, his hand on Calloway's arm. Sarge, don't. Everyone's watching. Everyone's recording. Calloway froze. His eyes darted to the crowd, to the phones, to the dog whose loyalty had just condemned him more thoroughly than any testimony. His hand dropped from his weapon. Margaret felt the world tilt. The adrenaline that had been holding her upright suddenly drained away, and her knees buckled. The dog turned instantly, pressing against her, trying to support her weight, but she was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her. "Ma'am, someone call an ambulance!" Martinez was at her side, easing her onto the grass. The dog was frantic now, licking her face, whining, his tail tucked low. His eyes were wide with a fear that transcended training, that spoke of loss and grief and the terror of losing someone precious all over again. "I'm okay," Margaret whispered, but her chest was tight, her left arm tingling. "I'm okay, boy. The world went gray at the edges. She woke to the smell of antiseptic and the steady beep of a heart monitor. The hospital room was small, painted in pale blues and greens designed to soothe, but that only made her feel more disoriented. Her chest ached, her arm was connected to an IV, and there was a weight across her legs that didn't belong. She looked down. The German shepherd was sprawled across the foot of her bed, his head resting on her shin, his eyes open and fixed on her face. The moment her eyes met his tail began to thump against the mattress, a sound like a muffled drum. "You're awake!" A nurse appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You gave us quite a scare, Miss Flynn. Mild cardiac episode brought on by stress. You're stable now, but you'll need to stay for observation." She glanced at the dog. "He refused to leave. The officers who brought you in tried to remove him, but he wouldn't budge. The doctor finally gave up and said he could stay. I think it's helping your vitals, honestly." Margaret's hand moved to the dog's head, her fingers threading through his fur. "What happened? Calloway?" "Arrested," a new voice spoke from the hallway. Martinez stepped into view, his uniform replaced with plain clothes, his face tired but relieved. Sergeant Calloway was taken into custody 2 hours ago. Internal Affairs has been investigating him for months, but they didn't have enough evidence until today. He held up his phone, showing a video of the confrontation in the park. 47 people recorded the incident. Your words, the dog's behavior, Calloway's reaction, it was enough to get a warrant. They searched his home and found over $50,000 in cash and enough narcotics to confirm he'd been skimming from evidence for over a year. Margaret closed her eyes, relief washing over her like a wave. And him? She looked at the dog. Martinez smiled. The department is issuing a formal apology. He's been officially retired from service with full honors. And as for custody, he pulled out a folder, handing it to her. If you're willing, Miss Flynn, it's yours, permanently. Her breath caught. Mine? The veterinary records we pulled show he's approximately 8 years old, which means he would have been about 2 when you left the service in '95. We traced his history back through 3 different agencies, and there's a 6-month gap we can't account for, right around the time your unit was decommissioned. We think he might have been part of a rehoming program that fell through. Somehow he ended up in the police force, but he never forgot. He was looking for you, Miss Flynn, and he found you. Margaret looked down at the dog, her dog, and saw the truth in his eyes. Not Titan, never Titan. Your name is Ranger. That's what I would have called you. That's who you are. The dog's tail beat harder against the bed. Martinez placed the folder on the bedside table. There's paperwork to sign when you're feeling up to it, but as far as we're concerned, he's already home. After Martinez left, Margaret and Ranger lay together in the hospital bed, her hand resting on his side, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing synchronize with her own. Outside, the city hummed with life, sirens and traffic, and a million stories unfolding in the streets below. But in this small room, there was only silence and warmth, and the unbreakable bond between 2 soldiers who had finally found their way back to each other. "We're okay now," Margaret murmured, her eyes growing heavy. Ranger's eyes drifted closed, his body relaxing fully for the first time in weeks, perhaps years. In his dreams there was no sand, no explosions, no fear. There was only her voice, steady and sure, telling him he was good, he was brave, he was home. 3 months later, Margaret Flynn stood in Riverside Park with Ranger at her side, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. She wore her old army jacket, the patches faded but proud. Ranger sat at perfect attention, his coat gleaming, his eyes bright. A young woman approached hesitantly, a little girl clutching her hand. "Excuse me, are you the woman from the video, the one with the police dog?" Margaret smiled. "I am, and this is Ranger." The little girl's eyes went wide. "Is he a hero?" Margaret looked down at Ranger, who looked back at her with those wise, steady eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, he's a hero, not because he's strong or because he was trained to fight. He's a hero because he knew the truth, and he refused to let anyone silence it. Even when it cost him everything, he stood his ground. That's what real courage is. It's not about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified." The little girl reached out slowly, and Ranger lowered his head, allowing her small hand to rest between his ears. She giggled, delighted, and her mother mouthed a silent thank you before leading her away. Margaret watched them go, then kneeled beside Ranger, her hand on his strong shoulder. "You saved me, boy, in more ways than one." Ranger leaned into her, and together they watched the sun climb higher. 2 warriors who had fought their battles, carried their scars, and found peace in the only place it had ever existed, with each other. Because some bonds aren't written in paperwork or protocols. Some bonds are written in the soul, forged in fire, and proven in loyalty that transcends time, fear, and every force that tries to tear them apart.
If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that courage comes in many forms and that the truth always finds a way to surface, then hit that subscribe button. Every week, we bring you stories of real bravery, real sacrifice, and real heroes. Some who walk on 2 legs and some on 4. Together, we honor those who serve, those who protect, and those who never give up on what's right, no matter the cost. Stay brave, stay loyal, and never underestimate the power of a bond that refuses